Nothing finishes off a room like crown molding. It almost doesn't seem complete without it. Not only does it provide an elegant transition from the walls to the ceiling, but it's literally become the benchmark of quality in today's homes. The beauty of crown molding comes from its projecting profile, but that's also what makes it challenging to cut and install. In this video, we're going to take the mystery out of cutting and installing crown molding. We'll take a look at the 3 steps to completing any room with crown mold: prepping the room, cutting the crown, and hanging it. Now let's get started. Now that we've got everything cleared out of the room, we're ready to get down to business. Now when you go to buy your crown molding, you're going to have to make 2 different decisions. The first one is, what type of crown am I going to use? There are 3 options. The first would be a composition product called MDF. The second would be finger joint pine. Both of those are for paint grade. And then the third is going to be stain grade crown made out of solid lumber. Second decision you've got to make is just how big. Now, proportions are important when you're working with moldings. If I'm working in a room that has 8-foot ceilings, I probably would go for between a 3 and a 4-inch crown mold. If I have 9-foot ceilings, I would say between 4 and 5-inch. And if I'm working in a room with tall ceilings, say 10 foot and above, I'd go with a 5-inch crown mold and maybe combine it with some other molding like a piece of baseboard for a built-up look. That's going to be the most efficient way that you can get things done. It's easier to cut 2 small pieces instead of one really big piece of molding. Now, you're also going to need to know just how much molding you're going to buy, and you want to take careful measurements because molding is expensive. So I would start out by measuring every wall in the room. And I actually measure it down at the floor because that's just easier. Okay, this wall was 13'6". I would round that up to 14 foot and then measure the other walls in the room, add all that together and add about 10% for waste. Now, the next thing that I like to do, and this really saves a lot of trouble, is to prime the molding and put at least 1 coat of enamel on it. And even if I was staining the molding, I'd still try to stain it and put 1 coat of sealer on it because it just saves you a lot of work. Now, we've already got our crown molding primed and 1 coat of enamel on, so we're ready to get to work. Let's go to the saw. If you've ever tried to cut crown molding, you know it can be a real mystery. When I cut baseboard, I stand it up against the fence of the saw and it's supported tight against the fence of the saw. When I cut casing trim, it fits down tight on the bed of the saw. Again, it's supported the whole time I'm making the cut. But crown molding doesn't fit tight against the fence or the base. It sits in between, and as you can see, it can move around a little bit. All it takes is a little bit of movement to dramatically change the cut, and what that means is I'm not going to get an accurate joint. So what the Crown-Pro does for me is provide a solid surface where I'm going to be holding the molding in exactly the same position every time. That means I'm going to get accurate cuts and great results. Now, to use the Crown-Pro, I only need to know 2 things: the spring angle that the molding is designed to be installed at, and here's what that means. What angle is the molding supposed to sit at between the wall and the ceiling? And then the second thing that I need to know is, am I making a left or right hand inside cut and a left or right hand outside cut? Now let's take a look at how we determine that spring angle. We'll put one side of our angle finder against the back of the molding and the other side against the bottom edge of the molding. Now the bottom edge of the molding is usually going to be the most decorative edge. I'm just going to tighten it up and read right here, that's 38 degrees. Most of the crown molding that you'll work with will be 38-degree crown molding. Now that we've determined our spring angle is 38 degrees, we just need to set the Crown-Pro to 38 degrees. And here's how we do that. On the back side, there's a gauge. All I need to do is loosen this knob, adjust it to 38 degrees, tighten the knob back up, and I'm ready to go. Now that the Crown-Pro is set, let's talk about making cuts. Almost all the cuts that you make will either be an inside corner or an outside corner, and every inside corner and outside corner have both a left and a right hand cut. The first thing that you need to know is the molding has to sit in the jig the same every time, and what you want to do is put the top edge of the molding right down here in the jig like this. First, let's take a look at how to make a left hand cut. Right now we're set up to make a left hand cut. Now for a left hand cut, the Crown-Pro is going to be on the right hand side of the saw blade. When you're using a miter saw, it's never a good idea to be cross-armed like that. That's really dangerous. So it can also help you remember which way you're cutting by remembering that to make a left-hand cut, I'm going to hold the molding with my right hand and operate the saw with my left hand. Now, to make a right-hand cut, I move the Crown-Pro over to the other side of the saw. I'm going to position the molding like this and operate the saw with my right hand. Now, for an inside cut, the blade is always going to line up with the Crown-Pro. To make an outside cut, the blade's going to be swung away from the Crown-Pro. That's really all you need to know. Now, don't worry about remembering all this because we're going to keep talking about it as we go through the video. And another thing, they've added these stickers right here which show you the correct positioning of the material. Again, don't worry, we're going to keep talking about it and you'll understand it. Well, by now I'm sure you're just about ready to start putting up some crown molding, but we need to do a little bit of planning before we get started. In every room you want to have a plan of how you're going to install, what order you're going to put up the piece of molding. I like to work towards an outside corner if I possibly can because I can cut those pieces a little bit long and test the joints before I nail them in place. If I don't have an outside corner, the next thing I would look for would be a long wall that's going to have a splice in it. Now, when you're splicing crown molding, you really don't want to splice a piece that's any shorter than this piece. It's about 32 inches long. So if you have to splice crown molding, always use a piece that's at least 32 inches long. If I'm working in a room and I don't have an outside corner, and I don't have a wall that's going to have a splice, then the next thing I want to think about is which wall will be the least visible wall, and I'd probably want to plan to finish up on that least visible wall. Just, gives you the most forgiveness at the end. Okay, a couple other things that we need to do before we're ready to put up any crown molding. The first one is we're going to go around and pop a chalk line around the room that is the bottom of the crown molding, and that's going to give us kind of a guide while we're nailing up the crown molding. There may be some up and down spots in the ceiling. There may even be some in and out spots in the wall. And popping that chalk line is going to help us notice that. You have to pay attention when you pop the line and just see if it's making good contact with the wall everywhere. If not, there may be an in or an out, and that can tend to make your crown molding go up or down, so you don't want that. Then the other thing that you need to know is we're going to add a furring strip right up there where the wall and the ceiling meet, and that's going to provide some extra lumber for us to nail the crown molding off to. We will be nailing through the bottom edge of the crown into the studs that are in the wall. We'll try to find those studs. Well, you could buy a stud finder, but what I like to do is just take a nail and drive a hole in the sheetrock above the chalk line to find the studs. And this is kind of a tip. Most of the time, if I'm a right-handed electrician and I'm nailing that box off, the stud's going to be on the left-hand side of the box. Once you find one of those studs, they're normally on 16-inch centers down the wall, or they might be on 24-inch centers. If you happen to be living in an old house that's got plaster, you're probably going to have to mount that furring strip and do most of your nailing into that furring strip, and you may even want to have a little bit bigger furring strip so that you can take care of that. Well, we're just about ready to get started. We just need to go cut some furring strips, pop some chalk lines, and then we'll be ready to cut and install some crown. To determine where we need to pop the chalk line, we need to know how far the crown drops down the wall. So I'm just holding a short piece of the crown. and I'm looking at where it meets the wall flat in both spots, I'll just put a little pencil mark right there. Now, here's a quick tip. Instead of having to take my tape measure every time and hold the tape measure and make that mark, what I like to do is cut a block of wood that's equal to that distance, and I'll just put the block of wood in the corner and mark the corners like that. Now we want to go around the whole room and put those marks in every corner, and then we'll pop our chalk lines. Here's a couple important things too. As you notice, we're using a blue chalk line. That's because blue is a color that's not permanent. Red and orange and a couple other colors are permanent chalk, so you don't want to use those because if you have to paint over them, it's almost impossible. You can also get white chalk, which can work, and you don't want to fill your chalk line just totally full of chalk where you got just a whole bunch of chalk coming off of it. That's just about perfect. When I'm putting up these furring strips, I don't have to worry about what I'm hitting with the nails because almost every wall that's built has either 2x4s or 2x6s, depending on the size wall, right at the very top. So I'm always able to nail into that. Now, it's also a good idea when you get started putting furring strips up to check and make sure that the furring strip's going to miss the back of the crown molding. Now, if I was putting up a lot bigger piece of crown molding, instead of this 3/4 inch thick furring strip, I might use an 1.5 by 1.5 inch furring strip. But as you can see, that's going to give me something really good to nail into later on. And I'll be able to nail through the top of that crown anywhere, and then along the bottom edge is where I'll be hitting the studs. Well, we've got all our furring strips in place and we've popped all of our chalk lines. There's one more thing that I want to do, and that is I'm going to check all these angles. In a perfect world, they'd all be 90 degrees, but things aren't always perfect. So I'm going to take my angle finder, put it up on the corner, and just pivot around until it makes contact with the sheetrock in both places. And then I just read right here what the angle is. I do just the opposite in this inside corner. Put it in place, pivot until it makes contact with the sheetrock, and then tighten it down. So I just read the wall angle right there. Now, if I'm within about 1 degree, I probably don't need to make any adjustment on my cut. But if it gets to be much more than that, I want to make some minor adjustments on my miter saw so that I get the best fit possible. Later on, we're going to show you how to do that. So all we need to do now is take some measurements and we'll be ready to start cutting some crown molding. That's 163 13/16. When you're working with crown molding, it's really important to get accurate measurements. This piece is going to be an inside corner to an inside corner, so I want to make that a really tight measurement. Back over here, I'm coming to an outside corner, and I might cut that a little bit shy or a little bit light. This is the first piece that we're going to do. We're starting at an inside corner, so this is going to be a left-hand inside corner cut. Down the other end, we're going to be making a right-hand inside corner cut. Now let's go cut some crown. Here's our first cut. Remember, this is a left-hand inside cut, so I'm going to be holding the crown molding with my right hand, and I'll use my left hand to operate the saw. Now just a quick safety tip, it's always a good idea to keep that saw down there until the blade totally stops. Now this is the longest point of the cut. That's where I'm going to hook my tape measure to get that measurement. Okay, this is the other end of our board. It's a right-hand inside cut. I'm going to lower the saw down and kind of take a look at where the blade's going to come. I always like to cut it a little bit long first so I can see where the blade's going to go. I don't ever try and make the perfect cut the first time. Now I can move over. I want to make sure I get this piece of scrap out of the way first. And I'm going to move over slightly and go ahead and make the cut. Okay, this piece of crown's ready to go. I made a right-hand inside cut on this end and a left-hand inside cut on that end. This is our piece of crown molding for the short wall that comes out from the closet. I'm going to be making a right-hand inside corner cut on this end and a left-hand outside corner cut on this other end. We'll make the right-hand inside corner cut first. Now the reason I wanted to make the right-hand inside corner cut first is so that I'd be able to hook my tape measure over this long point. This needs to be 28 1/8. And notice that I'm making the measurements along the bottom edge of the trim. Now, to make the right-hand outside corner cut, I actually leave the saw in the same position and move the Crown-Pro to the other side. Remember, when you're making an outside cut, the blade doesn't line up with the Crown-Pro. Again, I'm going to take a look real close. Try and get pretty close to start with. Now I'm going to move it over just a little bit. And make my final cut. Here's the last piece we need to cut. It goes across the front of the closet. It's going to be a left-hand inside corner to a right-hand outside corner. Again, I'm going to cut the inside corner first so I have a place to hook my tape measure. Remember, you always want to put the top edge of the crown down into the Crown-Pro. That's it, the last cut. Now we're ready to go start installing crown molding. Well, we're just about ready to nail up that first piece. Now, here's a couple things you want to know about nailing up crown molding. We've talked a little bit about the fact that we want to nail through the bottom and the top edge, and generally speaking about every 16 inches, which most studs are going to be on 16 inches. Occasionally you'll find something that's on 24 inches. Also, if you possibly can do it, you really should get a pneumatic nailer. It's just really hard working the overhead, and sometimes you're going to be hitting the trim with your hammer and mess it up. You can probably get a compressor and a nailer that'll do everything you need for under $200, and you can rent them sometimes too, or if you got a really nice neighbor, borrow one. Anyway, I really suggest using a pneumatic nailer, and I'd say at least a 2-inch nail. Most of the time I just go ahead and use 2.5-inch nails because I want to make sure that I'm really hitting something solid. Now, the other thing, especially on a longer piece, I don't nail within about 1.5 or 2 foot of the corners until I have a chance to see how that joint's going to fit. You can do a slight rolling up and down, either up the wall or down the wall of the crown mold to help make the joint fit. Don't want to do it a whole lot, but just a little bit. So, we're started now. Now this is my block that I use to mark the drop down from the ceiling, but you can also use as what we call a beater block. That's kind of a technical term. If I need to roll the crown up or down a little bit in the corner, sometimes the ceiling may take a sharp dip up in the corner and you really have to work hard to roll the crown mold up and get to meet. But that's why it's really important to not have nailed it too close to the corner until you're almost done. Okay. Well, I always try and cut these inside corner to inside corners a little bit long, but this time I didn't quite get it long enough. So here's a little trick that I'm going to do to make the joint work out. I've rolled the piece up fairly high. Now we're going to go ahead and bring the piece of crown in. And what I want to do is get it to where it's making contact at the top, like that. And I'll just put a nail right over here. Now what I want to do is take a real thin wooden shim and just place it behind the crown, and what it's going to do is force it down and force it to where it'll close that joint a little bit. I may roll that other one up just a tiny bit. Actually, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to see if I can make it look better by putting the shim behind this piece instead. Yeah, that's quite a bit better. So I'll roll that up a little bit. Just put the shim behind that one. I'll shoot a nail here. So it was a little bit short, but by adding a shim behind one corner, I was able to bring it out and overcome the fact that it was a little bit short. Then all I've got to do is just take a utility knife, trim the shim off right there, and before we paint, we'll just run a little bit of caulk along the bottom edge. If it looks like a piece is going to be a little bit too long to go in, sometimes you can take just a little bit off of it with a utility knife, and then it'll let it slide in and you can test the fit. Now, if you had to take too much off the end, you'll eventually need to go back to the saw, but by taking some off, I can at least test this fit in the corner and see how it's going to go. Well, as you can see, one of the secrets to installing crown mold is don't get frustrated. When you first put the pieces up there, the joint may not look that good. It's probably because there's some kind of an imperfection in the sheetrock. Just make some minor adjustments and you'll end up with a good looking joint. Okay. Now we're about ready to bring the whole thing together and meet at this outside corner, which again is kind of where we've got some forgiveness because we can check it and check and see how the fit goes together before we nail it. Well, we've worked our way to the last joint. Just like we planned, we're finishing up at the outside corner. By the way, I put a little bit of glue in this outside joint, and I think that's a good idea. Some people even like to put glue in the inside corners, but I especially like to do it in the outside corner. Now another thing, it can really be helpful on an outside corner like this to be able to put some nails in that joint to help suck it together, but you're probably going to need something other than the big finish nailer to do that. I'm going to make a few adjustments and then we'll be finished. Well, that's really all there is to crown molding. It's not that mysterious after all. When you get consistent cuts with the Crown-Pro, all you have to do is make minor adjustments to get great results.